I do have a presentation to share, which I will do in a minute, but I would like to thank Exito. Thanks, Nikita, for the warm welcome and a very kind introduction. I was about to make a joke on myself, but you already did, so let's move on. I generally...
Before we jump into the presentation, right, we've got to make the most of the opportunity of talking to you. So, Mrs. Sinha, you've been identified among the top 20 CFOs in India. So what would you say is that absolute best one thing that you are doing that others are not? So it is your time to brag. Kindly do not be modest.
I think doing less and listening more. I think one of the thing which goes back to that award in the year which I got. I think that was the year when I was raising funds for a company which I was working for, Greenlight Planet, and we were raising a lot of money. And there was a lot of push from the people who were working for me. I had about 125 people in my organization, and then I have to answer to the board and to my CEO and the other business leaders. So I think the best way was to bring all these two elements together and have a good marriage. And I think that's actually really helped when you build that marriage between the very senior staff and the mid senior and the junior people who are actually running the show for the organization. And I was kind of blessed that I had both the elements working very well for me. So I think that was the crux. So I think sometimes doing less and listening more and just adapting to what the environment says you too. I think it was just the combination of these things.
Fantastic, Mrs. Sinha. I mean, Papi Pet ke liye, I do have to talk more and listen. I will definitely pay attention to this amazing stage. Is all yours, Mrs. Sinha. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. So let me jump into the topic right away. I think this is a very relevant topic, and we have been hearing a lot in India, not only in India, I think globally also. We hear a lot about ESG. Now, what is ESG? That's something, it's for some people, it might be new, but for people who have been into this space, they already know what is ESG. But of course, there is a lot of myth, even with some of the leaders, as to what ESG means. If you were to ask me, if I go down the memory lane 5 years back, and I would say, and I would ask any C-suite leaders that what ESG is, they would term that it's a burden on us. But things have drastically changed in last decade or last 5 years, and people are adapting to this ESG element and looking this as an opportunity rather than terming this as a burden. Of course, there are elements which needs to be changed, the way corporates operate, the way people operate. So it's not only about setting up right policies or setting up parameters or KPIs within organization. I think ESG can be implemented only by bringing the behavioral change. So we, in the run to make something work, we just go behind our documentations, our theories, our policies, but the most important element which we forget is the human element. And I think to make ESG successful, you have to bring in the human element within the organization. So it's more of a cultural change which needs to be brought in and brought in with tangible effects for all the parties involved. I think that gives the sense of accomplishment. If you're just doing something to achieve a goal without getting certain value to yourself, that's not exciting, that's not fun. So all I'm talking about is bringing that behavioral and cultural change across the corporate actually helps. Now, when I was talking about, when you talk to the finance leader, they used to see this as a burden, and bringing this element to an CFO, they were feeling more burden because, they were the people who were approving these budgets. But it has turned upside down in terms of the way the finance leaders are seeing. And the finance leaders are the most apt leaders within the organization who can be the brand ambassadors and the torchbearers of the ESG efforts. So let me get into this more and talk some of the details about how you should perceive ESG. So I think the first and foremost thing is to educate ourselves what actually ESG means. So if you have to break ESG, E is environment. So environment, it comes with a vast, definition of climate change, etc. S has always been there. We just need to align it with ESG and the SDG goals, which has been defined by UN. So, some of these elements have always been running for years. It's just because we have not realized, it's just because we have not aligned it with certain parameters, which allows people to measure these things. So, when we talk about social, labor laws has ever been there, and we have been talking about it for so long and implementing it for so long. Now, aligning it with the business goals is something which is the real crux of implementing the ESG. Now, the third element is the governance part of it. And we all know how much regulated the Indian environment is in terms of the compliance and the governance and the other regulatory aspects which we have. And so are the other geographies across the world. So aligning these elements with our ESG and SDG goals are the four most important things which a CFO should do. Now, when I talked about Nikita, at the start, that you have to bring in that right marriage between two set of people, two set of management, two set of groups, cross-functional, hierarchical, vertical, horizontal, lateral, all of that stuff within that organization. When you bring them together, so here, what you need to do is the first element of any ESG, and I think CFOs are the most appropriate people in the organization to do that, because they touch all of these elements. They are they take care of the compliance, they take care of the social element, they take care of the laws and regulatory aspects, and they have the budget to work on the environment and the climate change part of the world. Now, when I'm talking about the marriage between these two things, I would like to give an example. When we talk about the element E, which is environment, just imagine we have, say, a Coca-Cola bottling plant, and it is running on a traditional electricity grid. Now, there are two ways to look at it. Somebody can tell, why don't we just solarize it and save some money on the electricity cost? Because if you solarize, if you put a commercial and industrial solar on any unit, roughly the savings is about 25 to 30% on the electricity cost. It provides a reliable source of energy, and so on and so forth. We all know that what kind of benefits solar brings in. Now, that element is a business element where you're talking about reduction of the cost. Now, this is what the pragmatic approach which I'm talking is. You have to marry that with these ESG. Now, sticking on the environment side of things, when I'm talking about solar, now at the start of the year, when the CFOs are building that budget, all they have to have an open mind and learn more about some of these elements of ESG. Now, if I were to say that that Coca-Cola plant would have adapted solarization of their warehouse or their bottling plant, that's a clear-cut ESG benefit to them, and that's a ESG implementation. But all you have to see is how you're embedding that with your business goals. Now, business goals was to reduce costs. You already did it with solarization. But if you start thinking, if you start implementing within yourself, and each and every element of your business plan, try to tie up with the ESG elements, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goal elements, which has been pronounced by UN, and there's a target by 2030 to meet. So if you tie that up, that marriage is, it's a beautiful marriage, because you're achieving both the results. You're achieving your business goals. At the same time, you are, involving yourself. You're taking your organization towards the ESG part. So I think that's the important part of it. Now, we all know in India, ESG at point of time, it's no longer a PR issue. It's a real issue. We all know about what the climate change is bringing to this world. And not only climate change, we hear about some of the social angle of, I don't want to be political here, but we all know where the manufacturing hub of the world is. We have heard about Zhangjian labor laws issues. There has been sanctions. There have been so many things which is going on. And supply chain has been hit. So if we start implementing, you're not only doing good for the society, you're actually doing good for your business. So that element needs to be understood. Bring in those elements in your critical part of the business planning, embed these. And I think this can only be done by educating people above you and below you who are actually going to take those decisions and who are actually going to implement. So that's where the CFO has to bridge that gap in bringing these two elements together. Now, I did talk about the SDGs. Now, one of the most important aspect here is if you're a large corporate, you need to help your small SMEs, vendors be part of this game, and that can only be done by educating them. Now, how do you educate them? There are simple tools to do that. You have these ESG checklists, which you can roll out when you're empaneling a vendor. There can be a situation where it's a very efficient, it's a very cost-effective, supply chain effective vendor, but they do not do the check mark on the ESG. But if you present them with an ESG checklist and you tell them that the next year you're not going to get a contract if you do not fulfill this criteria. Now, if they have to attain business, they have to get more business, they will adapt it. So it's not something theoretical. There are several ways you can educate them. There are several ways you can actually propagate this whole idea. So all you have to do is bring in those elements and make those certain changes in your day-to-day process and operations, which will lead to these changes. And this is short, not a fortnight event. It's not a T20 game. It's a test match. It will take its own time. I think the biggest things to implement when it comes to implementation, I think the biggest challenge is the change management. How do you make people accept that change? So I think this is where the fight is. In terms of education and propagating this. Now, you have to find alternatives. We have seen in past couple of months as to how some of the e-commerce giants in India have moved out of plastic packaging. And it was, it may sound that it was simple, but there's so many thoughts goes behind. What happens if it's raining, if there's an electronic item? So they have to adopt different methods to kind of adapt to these changes. But ultimately, the long-term results is you're going to save on plastic. Ultimately, there'll be cost efficiency. You change your supply chain mechanism in order to improve certain other challenges which you may face, that it's not wrapped in a plastic. Now, again, recycled material use. If I would have been talking about this, say, 5 years, 7 years back, then recycled material products were expensive. But now, since we are doing so much recycling, the volumes have increased. Actually, it's getting cost effective. So at the end of the day, by bringing this change, you're not helping the overall cause of the ESG, but you're actually bringing the efficiency in your business. So this is how we do at SIMA. I just wanted to present. I don't want to advertise anything, but I just want to tell you one thing as to how SIMA actually does this, align this, and we work with so many small companies. So we have about 40 portfolio companies who we work with. We not only invest with them, but we actually literally work with them to develop their ESG processes and set certain goals. And that's how you actually do the marry the business activities and the social impact. And that can be done with the certain goals and aligning it. It's very difficult that you, on day one, you start implementing all of it. You start small and you see what your resources are. Everybody wants to do everything, but at the end of the day, you have to see how much money you have in your pocket and how much you can deploy for these certain changes. Of course, there might be some upfront cost when you do that, but in a longer run, these definitely are not going to make your processes efficient, but they are going to be certainly helpful in the overall variable cost productivity of the company. Now, this is the last bit which I wanted to talk about, was the benefits of the ESG adaptation. Now, it may sound theoretical that you are just implementing it for the sake of attaining certain social or governance or environmental goals, but it's not. I think the world is changing. If you're introducing sustainable products, there are mandates from various corporates, there are mandates from various organizations to just use the sustainable products. So you can actually grow your top line. There are certain mandates to buy products which are made in certain way, which is creating a social value to the customers. We are all seeing how much the organizations are working in terms of connecting the remote vendors, whether it be the farmers or the artists or the other people who are doing something in the rural areas, and they want to bring their work and eliminate the middlemen there and bring it to the end customer. So, there are several ways where people want to have the product made using sustainable elements. So that can actually help, grow your top line. Now, I did talk about, the cost reduction element. I did talk about how the CNI solar actually does. So all that can be done by creating that mindset, by bringing that element, by keeping eyes and ears open. So I think every CFO should go through those 17 SDG goals. And I'm sure at least 10 of them completely aligns what they're actually align with what they're actually doing. It's just aligning and propagating that is the main element. And that's how we learn. And that's how you will develop these processes, embed them into your overall mechanics of how you operate. Now you create a better relationship with the regulators, policymakers, and investors. Now, I, as an investors who work at SIMA, we have a clear mandate with certain SDGs, certain ESG goals. And believe me or not, there are about $2.5 billion of money which is allocated just this year in Europe to fund in green bonds, which is aligned with these UN SDG goals. And this is only Europe. Australia is about $2 billion. So, these are not small numbers, these are big numbers. So if you adopt these ESG related policies, ESG related processes, it's not only going to be the beneficial in a shorter term, but it's, as I said, it's not a T20, it's a test match. Overall, you're going to attract more investors who are more aligned on these goals. And at the end of the day, all you're doing is enhancing your shareholders' value by not only bringing growth, but bringing the growth on the social side of it. So, so I will pause here and kind of end my talk on ESG is it's very real. All we have to adopt certain changes based on the availability of the resources. So I wish good luck to everyone and hopeful that this will bring certain changes. You might want to do more research as to how you align your corporates. So I'm again thanking Exito for having me here. So thank you so much. That was for me.